Hey guys, welcome to the second part of graphing standard form video. The second part of the video is going to go over just finding the vertex when the equation is in standard form and we're asked to find the vertex. So for example, in 1, 2, and 3 here, we're given 3 equations and they're in standard form, or at least we need to check for that. But we want to be able to find the vertex without a graph, right? So normally when we have a graph, we look at it and we're like, oh, that's the vertex. It's that center point. It's that highest or lowest point. But here I don't have a graph. So how could I find it by hand without using a graph? Well, to do that, we want to use the axis of symmetry formula. Okay, the axis of symmetry formula, as I mentioned previously in the video, in the first part, is that it is x equals negative b divided by 2a. Now, this is located on the star formula chart, so it is not a formula that you do have to memorize, but it is helpful to know. And so like, well, why do I have to use that? Well, if I go back to parabolic parts from the day before when we had these notes, what did we notice about the vertex and the axis of symmetry? The axis of symmetry number is always the same x value as your vertex. So as long as I know one of those, I can find the other, right? So same thing here. Your x value in your vertex is 2 and your axis of symmetry number is 2. So those numbers are the same. So in order to do the axis of symmetry formula, we need to first identify things. So like, where do these a's and b's come from, right? Well, the first part is x equals. And it's always going to be x equals because it's a vertical line. And so that's how our equation always starts. But you're like, well, where do b and a come from? Well, that's going to come from our equation in standard form. Now remember, an equation in standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c for a quadratic. Okay, you want the highest exponent first, and then you want it to continue to get smaller. And the very last thing is always the one with just a regular number. So the first term, which is going to be your squared term, always has an x squared. The second term has just a single x, and then the last term is just the number. So that's standard form. So before we actually start, we check with number 1. Is this equation in standard form? Yes. So because it is in standard form, I'm going to go ahead and identify my a, b, and c, just like we did when we were factoring. So our a value here is 2. Remember, a, b, and c are just numbers. B is negative 8, and c is positive 6. Okay, now the formula doesn't need the c value, but it is safe to identify it just in case, right? So the formula is x equals negative b divided by 2a. Now this negative sign is part of the formula, okay? So it's not like I made that up. So we have x equals, now we're going to use this formula, negative, and then I have my b value. What is my b value for this equation? Negative 8. Now when I plug numbers in, I always use parentheses. If you don't want to make a mistake, you want to make sure you always use parentheses. Divided by 2, and then what's our a value? Well, our a value is 2. Okay, now we're going to simplify this. Well, what does this equal? Well, this equals, well, negative 8 makes positive 8. Okay, and then 2 times 2 is 4. So that's going to equal 2. So x equals 2. So what did I just solve for here? Well, I just solved for the axis of symmetry. Okay, now it did ask me to find both. No, it didn't actually, but we need it anyways. So on your homework, you may be asked to find the axis of symmetry and the vertex. Well, here I found the axis of symmetry, but the goal here is that we want to find the vertex. So it's good that we know the axis of symmetry, but we really want to know what the vertex is. Well, what do I know about the vertex? It's a point, right? It's going to be a point, but what do I already know about the x value? It's also going to be 2. Remember, the x value in your vertex is the same as the axis of symmetry x values. Those are the same. So that's why I already know that it's going to be 2 there. So I know that x equals 2. Well, if I know x equals 2, then I have to find the y value for my vertex. So this is kind of like substitution. X equals 2. So where can I plug that in? Well, I can plug that into the equation anywhere I see an x. Okay, so I'm going to plug it in for anywhere I see an x. So I see an x here, and I see an x here. Okay, I'm going to plug in a 2 for this x and for this x. So I would have, y equals 2, and in parentheses, anytime you plug something in, you always use parentheses. You don't want to make a mistake. So 2 squared, so again, I'm substituting the x out and I'm plugging in the 2 because I'm trying to find out what the y is. minus 8, and in parentheses, I have another 2 plus 6. Okay, so all I've done here is I've plugged in the 2 that I got from my axis of symmetry because I'm trying to find the y value. Well, you can actually type in all of this in here in the calculator. So I'll show you what that's going to be. Okay, so I'm going to pick up my calculator. I'll show you with my camera. Now I am holding it, so it might be a little shaky. I'm sorry about that. Clear all that out. Okay, so we had 2 parentheses, 2, and then a squared. So again, all those buttons are here, so 2 parentheses 2 squared, and then we have minus 8 parentheses 2 parentheses plus 6. And I get negative 2. So all of that is going to equal negative 2. Well, what does that mean? Well, that's the y value of my vertex. That goes here. And so that's going to be my final answer for my vertex. So my vertex, if I were to graph this on a graph, the very center point would be 2, negative 2. All right, so we're going to do the same thing with number 2 to get more practice. Now this one's a little bit different because there's only 2 terms, but let's check to see if it's in standard form. Remember, standard form means you start with the highest exponent and you go smaller. So is number 2 in standard form? It is. Now, let's identify our a, b, and c then. What is our a going to be? Remember, a is attached to the x squared. And remember, a is just a number. So what is a? It's actually negative 1. Our b here is, whoa, that's not a b. Our b here is 6. b is attached to just the x. Well, what is c then if it's not there? It's 0. All right, so now we're going to use the axis of symmetry formula, x equals negative b divided by 2a. Okay, well, if I'm going to use this formula, I have x equals negative, and then what's my b value? It's 6. Okay, divided by 2 times my a value, which is negative 1. So I'm being super careful that I use parentheses every time I plug something in. And then in the numerator, I have negative 6, and then 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Negative 6 divided by negative 2 is positive 3. So I have x equals 3. Well, what did I just solve for? I just solved for the axis of symmetry. But what else do I know? I also know that the vertex for this problem will have the x value of positive 3. So now I got to solve for the y value. I know that x equals 3, so I'm going to plug in 3 for anywhere I see an x, okay? So I see an x here, plugging a 3 there, and I'm plugging in here. So anywhere I see an x, because I know x equals 3, I'm trying to find the y. So I have y equals negative 1, and you don't have to write the negative 1, but I'm going to, parentheses 3. Remember, you always use parentheses. If you don't want to make a mistake, please use parentheses. Plus 6, and then in parentheses, we have 3. Okay, so anywhere I saw an x, I plugged in my 3. So now I'm going to put this in the calculator. Now I'll show you both ways. You don't have to write the negative 1 in the front. You can just write the negative sign. So I'll do it with negative 1 first. So we have negative 1 parentheses 3 parentheses squared. And then I have plus 6 parentheses 3. And I get 9. Now what happens if I don't put negative 1 and I just put the negative, right? Because in the original equation, they didn't write the 1 there. So what happens if I don't write the 1? Well, if we have just negative parentheses 3 parentheses squared plus 6 parentheses 3 parentheses, right? So these are exactly the same. I just didn't write the 1 in the front. But I get the same exact answer. So again, it doesn't matter if the 1 is there. The most important thing you remember is that you use parentheses. That's going to be the thing that gets you. So this all equals positive 9. Y equals 9. Well, then that means that my y value for the vertex is 9. All right. Moving on to number 3. Before we move on and do anything and identify, is this in standard form? It's not. You always want to start with the biggest exponent first. So really, we need to rewrite this. It needs to be x squared plus 4. Okay. So now we're going to identify a, b, and c. A here is going to be 1 because the number in front of x squared is 1. Remember, a x squared. So the a is in front of the x squared. What's our b here? Well, b is the number that's always attached to the single x. Do we have a single x here? No, it's not here at all. So what is our b? It's going to be 0. And then what's my c value? That's always going to be the number that's always by itself, which is 4. Okay? So now I'm going to move on, and I'm going to use my axis of symmetry formula now that I've identified everything. Negative b over 2a. So I have x equals negative, what's b? It's 0. And you're like, negative 0? That doesn't even make sense. That's okay, because when we put it in our calculator, it's not going to make a difference. Negative 0 is just 0. And then I have 2, and then parentheses a, which is going to be 1 in this case. So this simplifies to 0 divided by 2, which just equals 0. 0 divided by 2 in my calculator is 0. So x equals 0. Well, I just solved for the axis of symmetry, AOS. But is that what I want to find in the end? No, I really want to find the vertex here. And I know that my vertex has an x value of 0 because those are always the same number. So knowing that my x value is 0, I'm going to plug in a 0 for anywhere I see an x in the equation. Well, I only see it in one spot, and I only see it there. Oh, not 3. I only see it here. So I'm going to plug in a 0 for just that one x. So then I have y equals parentheses 0. I still need parentheses. Anytime you plug in that number, you always use parentheses. Plus 4. Okay? Well, if I plug that all in my calculator, I'm just going to get 4. So that means my y value of the vertex is 4. Now, using this formula does take some getting used to, so just make sure that you get these skills down and just know that once you find the axis of symmetry, you move on and find the y value so you can find your vertex. If you have any questions, just please feel free to come in.